Hello there, and welcome. It's lovely to have you here, wherever you are in the world, curled up in bed, resting on the couch, or watching the rain through a quiet window. This is your time to settle, to breathe a little more slowly, and to let your thoughts drift gently. Tonight, we'll take a calm and winding path through the distant past, not through battlefields or loud declarations, but through quieter places, woven mats, polished stone, the hush of footsteps in a shaded courtyard. The kind of history that lingers in gestures and garden paths. The kind that whispers more than it speaks. If you enjoy this sort of gentle storytelling, rooted in history, wrapped in calm, you're welcome to like or subscribe, but only if it feels right for you. And if you'd like, I'd love for you to leave a comment below. Let us know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Something as simple as 2:13 a.m. in Toronto or 9:30 in Melbourne. It's a small way for us to feel quietly connected across time zones and night skies. Now might be a good moment to make a warm drink. Perhaps light a soft lamp. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow. And when you're ready, I'll begin our story. A soft unfolding of memory and earth, under bronze skies and starlit roofs. Let's step into the stillness together. You wake with the rain, not the storming kind, but the kind that falls in soft rhythms, gentle, persistent, and ancient. The sound of it touches the thatched roof above your head like fingers over stretched reed mats, filling the quiet with something older than speech. Through the cracks in the wall of your stilted house, cool morning light glows with the blue-gray hue of mist and wetwood. You lie still for a long moment, listening. The world is moving, but only just. Below the floorboards, the pigs shuffle and grunt softly in their pens. Their warmth rises with the earthy scent of damp straw and yesterday's firewood. Somewhere beyond the garden fence, a rooster calls into the fog, not with bravado, but with the weary tone of one who knows the rain will outlast him. You sit up slowly, brushing away a single strand of rice husk that clings to your tunic. The air is heavy with moisture, cool against your skin, and perfumed faintly with smoke from a neighbor's hearth. Your joints are stiff from the long journey you made 2 days ago, 6 days by riverboat from the trade delta, where you helped your uncle bring bronze arm rings and baskets of pickled mustard leaves to barter for salt and dried shrimp. You're back now, back where the land is soft underfoot, and the morning walks feel familiar, like old songs. The house is quiet except for the crackle of embers in the hearth. Your mother has already gone to the paddies. She always rises before the clouds begin their drift. In her place, a bundle of warm steamed rice sits by the fire, wrapped in banana leaf and tied with a loop of raffia. Next to it rests a gourd of tamarind water, cooled in the shadows. You carry both to the doorway and step outside. The platform of the house is slick with rain, but your feet know the way. Below you, the muddy ground glistens, scattered with puddles and tiny leaf boats left by children at play. You breathe deeply and exhale through your nose. The scent of soaked bamboo and rain-fed grass mixes with the faint brine of fish sauce rising from the market beyond the trees. Across the footpath, old woman Lean waves from her porch, where she sits weaving a fishing basket with deft fingers. Her eyes are like storm stones, cloudy, reflective, but warm with knowing. She nods at your bundle of rice and gives you a look that says, "Eat while it's warm," though she speaks no words. You nod in return and squat beneath the eaves of your home, opening the bundle slowly, letting the steam kiss your face. The rice is sticky and fragrant, flavored with ginger and sesame. You eat with your fingers, pressing small clumps together before placing them in your mouth, letting the taste dissolve slowly. There is no need for hurry. The morning is long and full of mist. Not far away, the great bronze drum waits beneath its shelter of palm thatch. It is your grandfather's drum, though he has been gone for many seasons now. The elders still strike it on festival days, or when someone is born, or when the rivers rise too high and prayers must be sent to the sky. But today it sleeps. Beads of rain cling to its surface, pooling in the carved spirals and animal shapes. A heron walks past it slowly, pausing as if to listen. You finish your meal and walk barefoot into the path. The world is hushed. Rain falls from broad banana leaves with the weight of old memory. Earthworms stretch from the mud, indifferent to your presence. Ferns curl along the edge of the dike, vibrant with life. You move quietly, not out of fear, but reverence. At the bend in the path, you find Lawn. She is standing knee-deep in the rice paddy, her conical hat tipped low, her sleeves tied above the elbow. Her hands are stained with soil and water, her face calm in the gray light. She does not look up right away. You watch her for a moment, taking in the slow, practiced rhythm of her planting. Each seedling is placed with care, spaced like breath. When she finally notices you, she smiles without speaking and motions for you to join her. You hesitate, not for lack of desire, but because you feel like an outsider in this morning rhythm. But she insists. You step into the paddy, the water warm and silky around your calves. The mud swallows your feet with a quiet sigh. Beside her, you begin to plant. The seedlings are cool and sharp in your fingers. You mimic her motions, press, twist, release. You've been gone long, she says, voice soft and steady. You nod. The markets were loud. The rain came late downriver. She hums an acknowledgement. Her eyes stay on the plants. The river's always late when you're waiting for it, she says, smiling with the corners of her mouth. For a while, you work in silence. The rain lightens, but the mist thickens. You cannot see the far side of the field anymore. Only the shape of a buffalo, half obscured, chewing thoughtfully beside a wooden plow. Do you ever miss the trade boats? Lon asks. You consider. The boats were swift. The food was different. But the nights were restless, and the markets smelled of too many bodies pressed into narrow lanes. Here, the air smells of water and old roots, and the silence holds your name. Not really, you reply. She smiles again. You share that smile for a long moment, neither of you looking up. When the sun finally breaks through the clouds, it comes not as a blaze, but a bloom, soft, golden, filtered through steam and rain. The mist around you glows. The rice paddies shimmer like bowls of light. You straighten your back and stretch your arms. Lawn steps from the paddy, wringing out her sleeves. She walks to the stone basin by the tree and washes her hands. You follow. The water is cold now, drawn from the deep well before sunrise. It wakes the skin like wind on still water. Will you help with the drying mats later? She asks. You nod. The grain must be spread before the next rain comes. She knows this, you know this, but still the question is asked. It is not about duty. It is about rhythm. By the time you reach the village square, the sun has lifted above the treetops. Children run barefoot across the open space, their hands clutching dragonfly wings and banana stems carved like birds. An old man naps under the tamarind tree, mouth open slightly, a string of dried areca nut beads dangling from his hand. From the far side of the square, the faint beat of a drum rises, not loud, not calling, just reminding, a rhythm to the morning, a memory of the sky. You pause by your house again, the one raised on stilts above the wet earth. You sit on the wooden platform, legs hanging over the edge, and watch as the last beads of rain slip from the eaves. Your hands still smell of soil and rice water. Your shoulders ache pleasantly. Inside, the embers still glow faintly beneath the ash. The gourd of tamarind water waits beside the hearth. Lawn passes by once more, carrying a woven basket of green papaya and morning herbs. She doesn't stop, just nods again, as if to say, we're where we need to be. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face. Somewhere nearby, the bronze drum catches a single drop of rain and answers with a soft, hollow note, like a bell underwater. You close your eyes. The day has just begun, but already it carries the calm of completion. Soon, you will spread the drying mats. Soon, the elders will gather for midday stories and herbal tea. But for now, you rest. Just for a little while. You are home, and the rain has remembered your name. The light has changed. It no longer glows with the soft silver of morning, but settles instead into a golden hush, a gentle weight in the air, as if the sun has exhaled and draped itself across the land like a woven mat, warm and low. The mist is gone now, chased back to the forested ridges, where it curls in the shade of bamboo groves and quiet springs. You rise from your resting place on the stilted porch and feel the midday stillness wrap around you. The world has slowed. The rice paddies shimmer under the open sky. their surface dappled with soft wind. Dragonflies hover above the fields, their wings like slivers of glass, catching the sun. Below your house, the pigs are asleep, buried in the straw. The chickens roost in the shade, and even the village dogs lie still with their eyes half closed, tails motionless in the dirt. A single myna bird calls from a distant jackfruit tree, then falls silent again. You step down from the platform, bare feet touching the warm ground with care. The soil is soft and fragrant. The earlier rain has left behind a trace of coolness beneath the heat, like the memory of a dream on your skin. The square is quieter now. Children have gone inside, their games paused until the shadows grow long again. The old man beneath the tamarind tree is gone too, replaced by a sleeping girl curled next to a basket of guavas, her breath slow and even. A pair of grandmothers sit nearby, shelling seeds in companionable silence. Their bangles click gently against clay bowls. You pass them with a nod, and they return it, their faces bright with sun and years. One of them smiles at you and offers a piece of dried lotus root. You take it with quiet gratitude. It is slightly sweet, slightly bitter, and feels like something meant to be remembered. Lon is waiting by the drying yard, her hat casting a circle of shadow around her face. She is sorting a mound of unhusked rice onto woven mats, spreading it evenly with a flat paddle made of split palm. The grains glint in the sun, pale gold and dusted with husk. As you approach, she hands you another paddle and gestures wordlessly to the far edge. You kneel and begin your work. The rice rustles as you spread it thinly. Each movement stirs a faint aroma, warm, nutty, and alive with the scent of harvest. The mats have been set on low bamboo frames to keep them off the ground. Beneath them, small frogs nestling in the shade. They do not mind your presence. You are part of the pattern. Lon does not speak for a while. You fall into rhythm together. Spread, smooth, press, adjust. Above you, the sun is soft rather than harsh. The earlier rain has tempered it. A breeze passes through, fluttering the edges of the drying mats and lifting the scent of wet grass and rice steam into the air. After some time, Lon speaks. Do you think the rice remembers the river? You glance at her, puzzled by the question. She continues, still focused on her work. It starts in the water, doesn't it? And then it becomes this food, wait, breath. I wonder if it forgets where it began. You think about her words as you press the grains flat. The rice fields stretch far to the east, fed by channels that wind from the mountain streams. You have followed them before, tracing their narrow curves beneath the forest canopy. They run with the kind of water that sings through stones and carries the scent of fallen flowers. Maybe the rice does remember. Maybe the land does too. I think it remembers the rain. You say softly. Lon smiles. Together, you finish laying out the rice. The grains catch the light like a net of stars spread across the yard. Lon wipes her forehead with the sleeve of her tunic and stands, stretching her arms above her head. Her movements are fluid, unhurried. You're better at this than you used to be, she says. I've had practice. Still clumsy with fish traps. You nod, and she laughs. Her laugh is light, but full, like the rustle of silk over a drum. It settles in your chest and lingers. Not loud enough to startle the birds, just enough to make them tilt their heads. You walk together to the shade of the jackfruit tree. There, a small pot of tea has been left to steep on a bed of coals. Its aroma is sweet and earthy, infused with pandan leaf and roasted rice. Lon pours 2 cups into clay bowls and hands you one. You drink slowly. The warmth spreads through you like low sunlight. From the tree above, a jackfruit ripens in silence. Its surface is bumpy and green, and its scent, faintly musky, faintly honeyed, clings to the breeze. Lon takes a sip of tea and closes her eyes. My mother says the trees speak if you wait long enough. Have you ever heard them? Only when I'm not trying. A quiet passes between you. You both watch a butterfly land on the rim of the bamboo water jar. It flutters its wings once, twice, and then stills, as if listening. From the northern edge of the village, the sound of someone splitting firewood echoes softly. Each strike is measured and slow, the pause between them longer than the sound itself. In the distance, a group of boys can be heard singing a paddling chant as they haul logs toward the riverbank. Their voices rise and fall like breath, carried on the wind. Lon sets her cup down and begins tying her hair into a loose braid. The bronze caster has returned, she says. They say he's brought new tools from across the lake. You nod. You had heard rumors before you left. The caster's family works in the highlands, where copper veins run under the hills like buried lightning. His drums are used in rituals, marriages, and farewells. His wife lines each one with prayers, whispered as she polishes the rim. You feel the quiet tug of curiosity, gentle and familiar. Lon sees the look in your eyes and grins. Go then, but stop by the orchard on your way back. My father's been waiting for a strong back to help him lift that old millstone. You nod and rise to your feet. I'll return before the shadows move. She waves you off, already collecting the cups, her fingers quick and careful. You walk through the eastern edge of the village, past fences woven from rattan and sweet-smelling lemongrass. A group of elders are seated beneath the longhouse awning, discussing weather signs and the change in bird migrations. They pause to nod at you, their eyes shaded beneath wide hats. You greet them gently, then continue past. The path becomes narrower here, winding through a grove of acacia trees whose blossoms release a faint, almost invisible perfume. It smells like honeyed wood and morning memories. The sunlight filters through the leaves in shifting patches, dappling your skin with light and shadow. You cross a narrow bridge of split logs, the river below running clear and quiet, carrying stray petals and drifting leaves. Small fish dart between rocks, startled by your shadow. At the far end of the path, the sound of metal reaches your ears, soft taps, steady and deliberate. The bronze caster's hut is built against a slope, where the soil is red and rich, flecked with iron. The yard is lined with broken molds and charcoal pits. An old drum shell leans against a wall, its surface etched with birds, spirals, and crescent moons. The caster is there, seated on a stool, carefully polishing the rim of a finished bell. His fingers are stained with soot. His eyes are steady and calm. Beside him, a young girl, perhaps his niece, grinds sand into a fine powder with a stone pestle. She hums to herself as she works, her song rising gently above the sound of bronze. You approach slowly, and he looks up, nodding once. You're the traveler, he says. His voice is low and even, like the wind inside a drum. I've returned, you reply. He gestures toward the bell. Feel the edge. It's smooth now, like river glass. You run your fingers along it. The surface is warm from the sun, but smooth indeed, worn to perfection. He watches you for a moment, then reaches into a sack beside him and pulls out a small bronze fishhook. For your uncle, he says. You take it carefully. The hook is light, elegant, and balanced. It smells faintly of metal and smoke. He returns to his work without further word. You watch him for a moment more, then bow gently and turn back toward the village. The walk home is slower. The path feels different now, familiar but touched with something new. The sound of the river follows you, soft and steady. The jackfruit tree comes into view, its fruit untouched, its leaves curling in the afternoon light. Lon is gone now, but her father waits in the orchard, sleeves rolled and ready. You join him with a quiet greeting, and together, you lift the old millstone, grunting softly, not from pain but from effort shared. The stone is heavy, but the earth is patient. As you finish, he offers you a slice of pomelo, its juice running cool and tart down your throat. The sun lowers slightly. A bird calls from the forest edge, and you sit once more beneath the tree, letting the warmth of the day settle deep into your bones. The day leans into stillness. The sharpness of noon has softened. The sunlight, once high and golden, now brushes sideways across the village, casting long shadows that stretch across earthen paths and sway with the slow movement of trees. The breeze has returned, not loud, but steady. It moves the bamboo leaves with a whispering hush and carries the faint, sweet scent of ripe guava from a nearby grove. You rise from the orchard with a quiet ache of fulfilled labor in your limbs. Your hands smell of pomelo rind and cool stone. The sky is slowly changing overhead, painted now with watercolor tones, pale rose, blue ash, and hints of deepening saffron. The clouds drift like boats above the horizon, quiet and deliberate. Land's father nods at you, satisfied. He does not speak, but his gratitude is clear in the small movement of his chin, the way he brushes his hands on his tunic with finality. Together, you roll the millstone into place beside the mortar bed, where we'll rest until the next season's pounding begins. You take the upper path home, the one that curves past the ancestral shrine and climbs gently above the village. It is not the quickest way, but it offers a view. The earth here is drier, more gravel than mud, and the scent of charcoal clings to the stones from the blacksmith's hut nearby. You pass a pile of spent oyster shells, bleached and cracked, and a pot filled with crushed river snail, a mixture used to paint house walls with a creamy white finish that catches the evening light. As you reach the top of the path, you pause beneath a tall beetle tree. From here, the village lies below you like a painted map, tiled thatch rooftops sloping gently, smoke curling from every hearth, and the quiet glitter of rice paddies holding the last reflections of the sun. Small boats bob at the river's edge, tethered with vine rope, their curved hulls cradling baskets and nets. Farther off, children chase one another along the dike, their laughter rising and falling like birds startled in a flight. The voices blend with the distant tapping of a loom and the rustling of laundry hung high to dry. These are the sounds of the hour that sits between work and rest, when no one hurries, and even the wind seems to wait. You descend the hill and pass by the shrine. It is small, no more than a raised platform of stone and wood, shaded by a low-hanging fig tree. Incense sticks stand in a jar of ash, their smoke rising in thin, wavering lines. Someone has left an offering, boiled eggs, sticky rice, and a few marigold petals floating in a clay bowl of water. A pair of paper cranes, folded neatly and tied with string, sway from the roof beam. You bow your head as you pass, and feel the quiet weight of memory press gently on your chest. Your own house is not far. You hear it before you see it, the faint sound of your mother's voice, humming an old lullaby as she sweeps the platform. You follow the scent of roasted yam and sesame, and find her seated with her legs tucked beneath her, brushing the floor with a broom of dried grass. She looks up and smiles when she sees you. "You're back before the light is gone," she says. You sit beside her, letting the hush of the evening fall around you both. She hands you a roasted yam wrapped in banana leaf. The skin is crisp and caramelized, and the inside steams gently in the open air. You take a bite. It tastes of earth, fire, and the hands that prepared it. Together, you eat without words for a while. A soft peace settles between you. Then, from beyond the village square, comes the sound of the bronze drum. Not loud, not urgent, just a single, rounded beat, deep and resonant. A low tone that rolls through the air like a stone across water. You look to your mother. She nods. They are calling for the weaving circle. She stands slowly, her joints stiff from the day's bending and sweeping. You rise with her, and the two of you walk toward the longhouse near the edge of the forest, where the women gather during the cool hours of dusk to work, to talk, and to remember. The path is lit now with small oil lamps, their flames protected by baskets, turned upside down and weighted with stones. The fireflies have begun to appear, blinking softly among the reeds, and floating just above the grass like scattered stars that have drifted too low. At the longhouse, a group has already formed. The youngest sit near the front, busy with looms and spindles. They tie knots with quick fingers, feeding bright threads through bamboo frames. Older women sit behind, weaving with slower rhythm, pausing often to observe, to sip warm ginger water, to share small stories that drift from one pair of lips to another like the smoke from their teacups. Lon sits among them, her face lit by the golden firelight, her fingers moving calmly through strands of indigo-dyed cotton. She looks up and smiles when she sees you. You join the circle, not to weave, but to sit. The circle always welcomes sitters. Your mother takes her usual place among the elders. She hums again, softer now, and begins threading black silk into a pattern that will one day become the sash of a wedding robe. You sit nearby on a reed mat, listening to the soft percussion of wood and thread, the voices like waves lapping gently at the edge of a riverbank. Someone begins a story. It is a tale of the first weaver, a girl who could sing patterns in a thread, and who once stitched the wind into the hem of her cloak. It is not told with fanfare. There are no great gestures or loud voices, just a steady rhythm, a gentle telling, the kind that folds itself into the air without taking more than it gives. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the warmth of the circle around you. The smell of indigo, smoke, and lemongrass rises like a shawl over your shoulders. The sound of the loom is steady and sure, like footsteps on a familiar path. The drum sounds again, once then twice. The light has faded. Lon sets aside her weaving, and so do the others. Slowly, the circle begins to dissolve. Women gather their spools, their baskets, their mats. Laughter lingers in the air, soft and low, like the last glow of sun behind the trees. You and your mother walk home in silence, your steps matched, your shadows long beside you. As you reach the house, the first stars begin to pierce the sky. The clouds have drifted, and the moon has risen, full and pale, reflecting in every puddle and basin like a ghost of itself. You fetch water from the jar near the steps and wash your hands and feet. The water is cool and smooth, carrying the scent of clay and the memory of rain. Inside, your bed awaits, a mat laid neatly beside the hearth, with a woven blanket folded at its edge. Your mother hums once more as she stirs the last of the coals. The room smells of charred rice ash, and slow sleep. You lie down, not with urgency, but with the slow ease of someone whose body has moved well through the day. Above you, the roof creaks gently in the night air. Outside, frogs begin their low, rhythmic chorus. Somewhere beyond the fields, the bronze drum is struck one final time. It rolls through the night like a whisper meant only for those who are ready to listen. You close your eyes and feel the cool breath of twilight on your skin. The day is gone. The stars have returned, and sleep waits just beyond the doorway. Darkness does not fall all at once. It arrives in gentle layers, folding over the village like a blanket woven from smoke and starlight. One by one, the oil lamps are dimmed. One by one, doorways are closed. There is no bell to signal the end of the day, only the soft surrender of sound, the slow quieting of voices, the hush of footsteps growing fewer, the distant echo of the river, steady and unchanged. You lie on your mat beside the hearth. The fire has faded to a low, amber glow, tucked beneath a layer of ash to keep it breathing through the night. Outside, the frogs have found their rhythm. Their croaking is deep and musical, pulsing like the heartbeat of the fields. Cicadas trill above them in spiraling waves. Occasionally, the soft hoot of a night bird floats down from the treetops, carried on air that smells faintly of bamboo and damp earth. Your blanket is made of rough cotton dyed with soaked bark and softened by many washings. You draw it over your legs and rest your hands against your chest. The warmth from the hearth reaches you faintly, a distant memory of flame. The roof above you creaks as it settles in the cool air. The walls breathe with the world outside, porous, alive, never quite still. Your mother sleeps across from you, turned on her side, her breathing long and even. Her hair is gathered beneath a cloth wrap. Her hands, calloused and calm, rest over her stomach. She has spent her energy wisely today. The scent of her beetled shoe, bitter and sweet, lingers in the room like a farewell. You do not sleep yet, not fully. Your mind drifts. Earlier today, as the last sunlight touched the rice fields, you watched a small group of elders climb the northern path, each carrying a gourd of wine and a bundle of herbs. They were headed toward the hill shrine, where the sky opens wide, and the stars seem to rest closer to the land. Perhaps they have lit a fire there now, and are offering prayers for good planting or protection from early floods. You imagine the warmth of that fire, the soft rise of herbal smoke curling into the night sky. You imagine the sound of their voices, low, slow, like leaves moving over dry wood. It brings a quiet comfort, knowing that someone out there is still awake, keeping company with the night. You turn on your side, facing the wall, and close your eyes. But the night does not hurry you. It is generous with its silence. And so, you wait in that space between thought and dream, allowing memory and breath to rise and fall like the tides. From far beyond the village, perhaps beyond the hills themselves, a wind stirs. It is cool, but not sharp. It smells of rain carried from another valley. It moves through the bamboo groves, through the trees behind the orchard, across the still paddies, and into the open spaces between houses. It brushes your face through the cracks in the wall. You pull your blanket higher and feel the ease of it settle into your bones. Sometime later, you hear footsteps. Not hurried, not heavy, just the soft, deliberate tread of someone walking barefoot across the platform. A moment later, the door creaks open and then closes gently. You know the sound well. It is your uncle returning from the lower village. He has been helping a cousin repair a collapsed granary wall. You hear the rustle of his pack as he places it down, the soft splash of water as he rinses his hands at the jar. Then silence. A shared silence. He does not light a lamp. He knows you are near sleep, and he too is content to move within the quiet. You shift your body slightly. A signal. I am awake, but drifting. He responds with a low, wordless sound of acknowledgement and settles onto his mat. Within minutes, the house is still again. The frogs continue their song. The moon rises higher. You open your eyes one last time and look toward the ceiling. In the gaps between the bamboo slats, you can see a few stars peeking through. They shimmer faintly, like fish swimming beneath water. You remember a story your grandmother once told, that stars were old spirits, slowly climbing a ladder to the sky. Each one moved only a little each night, careful and patient. You believed it then, and a part of you still does. A sudden scent draws your attention. Smoke and honey, drifting faintly from outside. You remember, tonight is the Festival of Lantern Ash. It comes once a year, after the first rice transplanting and before the flood warnings begin. Villagers place offerings in small clay bowls, incense, sesame oil, and bits of dried fruit, and leave them by their doorways. The smoke is meant to guide ancestral spirits to rest, and the sweetness to remind them of kindness. The bowls are lit just after nightfall, and by now the flames have turned to ember, glowing softly against the silence. You rise quietly and step outside. The wooden boards beneath your feet are cool, brushed with dew. The air greets you gently. It is cooler than before, laced with the scent of damp wood and the faint perfume of wilted marigolds. The village is mostly dark. Only the occasional ember glows beside a doorway. The bowls flicker like low stars gathered on earth. The air carries a faint hum, part frog chorus, part breeze, part memory. You sit on the edge of the platform and let your feet dangle. From here, you can see the whole path. A single lantern still burns near the longhouse, where someone has hung strips of cloth inscribed with old proverbs. They flutter in the night breeze like slow birds, their fabric catching the moonlight in folds and shadows. You do not need to read them. You have known their meaning since childhood. Be soft like water, and you will wear through stone. Carry silence, and you will hear everything. Leave your door open to the wind, and it will bring stories. You lean against the pillar and rest your head against the wood. It is warm from the day's sun and holds the scent of resin. Your body is still tired, but not heavy. It feels light now, like smoke lifting into air. Lon passes by on the road below. She is carrying a small jar, wrapped in cloth. She does not see you at first. Her steps are slow, barefoot, careful. She stops beside her family's altar and places the jar there. Then she lights a stick of incense and holds it still between her hands. She closes her eyes. For a moment, everything around you seems to pause. The frogs, the breeze, even the clouds above. Then she opens her eyes and gently blows on the incense, watching the smoke rise in spirals. She looks up at the sky, then down at the offering, and finally, she turns to go. She notices you then. Her expression does not change, but she raises her hand in a quiet wave. You return it, slow and deliberate. She smiles, then disappears into the shadows between houses, her steps silent on the earth. You remain seated, watching the last of the incense curl into the night. The air is cool further now, but it does not chill. It comforts. You return to your mat and lie down again. The house is darker. Your uncle has drifted asleep. Your mother's breathing is deep, rhythmic. Your body eases into stillness. No need to fight it. Outside, the wind moves through the banana leaves. The last of the lanterns dims, and somewhere, far beyond the reach of memory, a bronze bell sounds once, soft, round, and far away, like the voice of the sky reminding you that everything is where it should be. You sleep, not because the day is over, but because it has been enough, and enough is the gentlest place to rest. The rain had paused, but the clouds still lingered, long and gray over the ridges of the Annamite Mountains. The air was damp with the memory of thunder, and the leaves along the trail, broad, waxy, and trembling, caught what remained of the morning softness. A low wind passed through the forest canopy, making the boughs whisper gently to one another. The woman moved slowly along the ridge path, barefoot. Her steps were measured, deliberate. She was not hiding, nor was she in haste. The ground beneath her feet was warm, pressed soft by last night's storm, and threaded with roots and fallen frangipani blossoms. Her name was True Tren, but in that moment, she was not a warrior, not yet a memory carved into the silence of mountains. She was simply a young woman walking in the hush between storms, wrapped in a cotton tunic dyed the color of deep river silt. Her hair, long and bound behind her head, was still wet from bathing in the spring below the hilltop shrine. Her shoulders carried no armor. Her hands held no spear, only a small bundle of herbs. She walked until the forest opened into a clearing. There, the land dropped gently into a valley where rice fields shimmered like bronze under the sunless sky. In the distance, she could see the faint line of a village, stilted houses, small cooking fires, and the wavering haze of smoke rising in a lazy thread toward the hills. She sat on a flat rock at the edge of the clearing and watched. Below her, the valley pulsed with ordinary life. Men waded through flooded paddies, shoulders bent in rhythm. Women rinsed greens in the stream near the water buffalo pen. Children chased dragonflies between rows of reeds. The voices of farmers drifted upward on the breeze, low, warm, full of the comfort that comes from saying simple things to familiar people. Lady True did not yet know the fullness of her place in history. She did not know that poets would one day call her the heavenly maiden who rode elephants into battle, or that generations would whisper her name as both praise and prayer. But she knew what it meant to watch from above, to sit alone and listen, and to feel the distant pull of a world that was not content to remain quiet. The valley was peaceful, but it was not untouched. Beyond the forest, past the ridge, and over the next range, the whispers of foreign soldiers had grown louder. The southern dynasty, born of distant courts, had sent its agents deeper into the hills, measuring, taxing, reshaping the quiet edges of the land. They came not with fire, but with paper and seal. They claimed harvests, changed village names, and spoke of civilization as though it were something newly invented. She had seen them. Last spring, a party of tax collectors had arrived in her mother's village, wrapped in silk and escorted by guards whose faces held more boredom than cruelty. They had not struck anyone. They had not shouted, but they had stayed long enough to drain the granaries, and they had left behind fewer words than scrolls. Her uncle's name had been written wrong. Her cousin's ox had been taken as an offering of compliance. Her mother had bowed when she spoke to them, though she had never bowed to anyone before. Since then, Lady True had spent more time in the hills, not to escape, but to listen. From the elders, she had learned how the forests breathed with the seasons. From her brother, she had learned to throw a spear without bruising her shoulder. From the midwives, she had learned to boil bitter roots into medicine, and to count pulses on the wrist like raindrops on a palm leaf. From the weavers, she had learned to dye cloth in silence, with prayers hidden between each thread. But more than anything, she had learned how to wait. A dragonfly landed on her knee. Its wings flickered, almost transparent, like smoke drawn in sunlight. She did not move. Somewhere nearby, a hornbill called through the trees. Its voice echoed, hollow and curved, as if shaped by the mountain itself. She watched the valley below. The people working there did not know she was watching. She liked it that way. She preferred to see them as they were, unaware, at ease. She knew their movements intimately, the way a mother shifted her child from one hip to the other as she stirred a pot, the way a grandfather tilted his head before speaking, waiting to taste the thought before giving it shape. These were the rhythms she treasured. These were the rituals she considered sacred. And yet, they were also fragile. A boy's laugh rose up from the fields, clear, strong, and filled with nothing but air and joy. Lady True smiled. The sound reminded her of her younger brother, who had once stolen a mango from a shrine offering and hidden it in his shirt all afternoon, refusing to eat it until he had climbed to the top of a fig tree to do so. She had scolded him, then joined him. The mango had tasted like sun and sweetness. The dragonfly lifted from her knee. Its wings caught the light again, and it rose toward the canopy, spinning once before disappearing between the branches. Lady True stood. The bundle of herbs in her hand was slightly damp, crushed at one corner, but still fragrant. She would take them to the widow by the ridge path, the one whose joints ached when the air turned wet. The roots would help. She would mix them with ginger and bark and pound them into a paste with rice vinegar. The woman would not thank her in words. She never did. But her eyes would soften, and she would offer a bowl of boiled yam, always pretending she had just made too much. That was how kindness worked here. It did not need a name. As Lady True stepped back onto the path, the valley slipped from view behind the trees. The wind shifted slightly, brushing through her tunic and tugging a few strands of hair loose from her wrap. She did not fix them. She let them move with the breeze, like grass bending beneath water. She walked slowly, without urgency. But beneath her quiet steps, something deeper stirred. Not anger, not even resistance. Something more elemental. It was the knowledge that the land itself was watching. That the hills, the rivers, the trees, they remembered who belonged to them. And it was in that remembering that she found her shape. She was not born into war, but she would carry it if she must. Not as conquest, but as care. As the wind carried her down the ridge, she passed a cluster of young bamboo, their stalks swaying gently. She placed one hand on the nearest stem, fingers brushing the smooth green surface. It trembled beneath her touch, not in fear, but in recognition. Lady True continued her walk. Behind her, the forest whispered softly, and somewhere, far below, in the heart of the valley, a bronze drum was struck. Not loudly, just once. A low, patient note. A beginning. Years passed. The rains continued to fall as they always had. Sometimes gentle, sometimes sudden. The rice fields still shimmered in the mornings. Children still ran along dikes with dragonflies tied to strings. The smoke from cooking fires rose in slow spirals over thatched roofs. And yet, beneath the familiar rhythm of the seasons, a new kind of silence had taken root. The elders of the village remembered her, not always by name, and not in full detail, but they remembered the woman who had once walked barefoot along the ridges, the woman who left offerings at shrines without seeking favor, who brought herbs to aching joints, and who vanished for days into the deeper forest when word came of soldiers traveling up the river. Lady True had not lingered. She had stayed just long enough to plant questions in the minds of those who watched her, quietly, from their doorways or fields. Not questions about loyalty or power, but slower ones, deeper ones. What it meant to protect a place, what it meant to belong, what it meant to speak without shouting. Her name returned years later, like a song recalled during a quiet moment. By then, stories had begun to drift through the lowlands. Stories of a woman in white armor who rode a war elephant into the mist, of a rebel voice rising from the forest hills, of a name spoken by soldiers with nervous glances, of camps that had been raided under cover of fog, of proclamations that appeared overnight on granary walls, written in ochre and soot, declaring that the mountains did not belong to kings who had never touched them. But in the village where she once sat above the rice valley, no one spoke of battle. Not directly. Instead, they remembered her in smaller things. An old woman brushing herbs against a wrist before boiling them. A young girl walking without shoes, even on cold mornings. A grandmother folding a cloth with extra care before tucking it into her basket. A boy lingering by the shrine longer than usual, as though waiting for a story that had no beginning. The villagers were not foolish. They knew what had happened. They knew that the quiet woman from the hills had grown into a figure much larger than herself. They had heard that she had gathered fighters, that she had spoken plainly to governors who rode on horseback with silk robes and scrolls of command, that she had built camps beneath waterfalls and trained women to hold spears with steady hands. They had also heard, much later, that she had died, not in battle, but somewhere alone. Some said she took her own life rather than be captured. Others said she walked into the forest one last time and never came back. The details changed with the telling, but the silence remained the same. A kind of reverence, a kind of distance. No one ever raised a monument in the village. There were no carved stones, no heroic statues, just a single tree, tall and old, growing beside the path where she once watched the valley. Its roots had twisted wide, holding the soil in gentle coils. Its leaves fell every year without fuss, blanketing the ridge in gold. Every so often, a young person would climb the ridge alone and sit beneath it. They rarely said why. They would return hours later with the same quiet expression, the one that did not ask to be named. Even the children learned her story differently, not from scrolls, but from the spaces between words, from the way their grandmothers combed their hair in silence, from the way their fathers paused when speaking of the hills, from the way aunts and uncles offered warnings that sounded like riddles. There are roots beneath the rice you cannot pull. Some trees remember who planted them. The wind listens best when you speak without sound. The rice harvest continued each year. The paddies filled and drained with the sky's mood. The village prospered some seasons and struggled in others. Officials came and went. Taxes shifted. Rulers changed names. But through it all, a soft knowledge remained, not written, but woven into cloth, into gesture, into the very air between generations. Once, a scholar from the southern capital visited the village. He came with scrolls and assistants, traveling on a cart drawn by oxen. His robes were clean, his hands free of calluses. He asked many questions. He wanted to know about bronze drums, about ancestral shrines, about local dialects. He spoke politely, but with the tone of one who expected to be teaching, even as he listened. During his visit, he asked about Lady True. He had read of her, he said. He had seen her name written on bamboo slips, her story inked in formal Chinese by clerks who had never stepped into the northern forests. He asked, what did she lead her army? Which village was her birthplace? How many men did she command? The villagers offered tea, but few answers. They said she had once walked their trails, that she had spoken to elders beneath the jackfruit tree, that she had left behind a sense of waiting, not a list of victories. The scholar frowned. He wanted detail, dates, geography, evidence. But the villagers only smiled with soft patience. One elder, her hair white as river mist, placed a single guava on the table before the scholar. She tasted like this, she said, and she walked away. The scholar left the next day, his scrolls no heavier than when he arrived. The tree on the ridge continued to drop its leaves. No one climbed it. No one carved into it. But each spring, someone left a single folded cloth tied to its lowest branch. It was never the same person. No one ever said who. But each year was there, cotton, clean, simple. Sometimes indigo, sometimes plain, sometimes patterned with tiny hand-stitched stars. When the wind moved through the leaves, the cloth fluttered quietly, like breath. And if one stood at the base of the ridge, looking up, the tree seemed to bow just slightly, as though remembering. Lady True was no longer a woman. Not exactly. She had become something else. A rhythm beneath the daily steps. A shape in the corner of memory. A presence carried not in victory, but in restraint. In the simple dignity of hands that refused to let go of what felt true. And so, the villagers went on. They planted rice. They boiled yam. They swept their thresholds with care. And in the long evenings, when the drums were silent and the lamps dim, some still looked toward the hills and imagined her walking, barefoot, quiet, watching, not to rule, not to be remembered, but to know that her place was still there, stitched into the mist and soil, unclaimed by empire, unfinished by history, waiting always for someone to sit and listen. The drums sat beneath the longhouse, not to be admired, not to be worshipped, but simply to be. Its presence was quiet but steady, covered gently with a mat of woven palm fronds to protect it from sun and insects. The drum stood on a bed of stone, waiting, as it always had, for a reason to speak. It had not been played in weeks. No one in the village feared it. There was no taboo. The elders simply agreed that a drum should not be touched without need, not because of superstition, but because it deserved rest. It was old, perhaps older than the house it now sheltered, and like an elder, it had earned the right to listen more than it spoke. The bronze was smooth and darkened with age. Its once polished gleam now softened to a warm, mottled sheen. Its surface was patterned with radiating lines and delicate motifs. Feathered birds in flight, rice grains in rows, human figures with outstretched arms, and rows of canoes each paddled by silent men who moved without water. The drum had seen many hands. Each mark had been cast in clay, pressed with care, poured with heat. The artisans who made it were long gone, their names forgotten, their methods remembered only in fragments, lines of poetry, a shard of mold, a chipped tool found by a stream. And yet, the drum remained. The children called it the one who sings the rain. It was not a name taught by elders, but one they had made themselves. When the drum was struck during festivals, only once or twice in a season, it released a sound that did not seem to belong to this world. Deep, rounded, and slow, it passed not only through the air but through the ribs and soil alike. It was not a melody. It was not a rhythm. It was a breath. Some villagers claimed the drum could summon water, not through magic, but through memory. It reminded the sky. They said that the earth was waiting. Others believed it calmed the animals, or called the ancestors nearer. No one argued. There was no need. The drum spoke only when asked, and never more than necessary. One afternoon, a girl named Tao sat beside it. She was 13, maybe 14. She had finished her work early, bundling millet and sweeping the clay floor of her family's home, and now rested in the shade, watching the dust dance in shafts of amber light. The drum was near her elbow, but she did not touch it. Instead, she leaned against its base, listening to the quiet that wrapped itself around them both. She had always liked the drum, not for its size or age, but for its stillness. When she sat near it, she didn't feel the need to speak. Her thoughts moved more slowly, like fish gliding through deep water. Her questions softened. Her worries about the coming harvest, about the rice worms, the new taxes, the faint cough in her mother's throat, felt smaller here. Not gone, but less heavy. She remembered, once, asking her grandfather why the drum was covered with birds. He had answered without lifting his eyes, so the sky would recognize its own voice. That was all he said, and Tao had nodded, though she didn't fully understand. Now, seated in the warmth of late afternoon, she began to hum a tune, quietly, a lullaby her grandmother had once sung as she stirred tea over the fire. The notes were simple, the words few, but as she hummed, she placed one palm against the drum's bronze surface. It felt cool, even in the heat, firm, solid, but not cold. She stopped humming and listened. Nothing changed, but something within her stilled. Years earlier, before Tao was born, a man from a lowland town had come to the village to study the drum. He had carried with him scrolls and brushes, and a long wooden staff carved with measuring lines. He had arrived in the season of drying fish, when the whole village smelled of salt and smoke, and had asked many questions. What is it used for? Who made it? Why are there frogs on the rim? The villagers had answered what they could. It is used to mark time. It was made long ago. Frogs sing before rain. The man had taken notes for 2 days. He tapped the drum with the edge of his staff, frowned at the dull sound, and said nothing. Then he left, thanking no one, his cart full of names and guesses. He did not understand the drum, but he had not been unkind, just impatient. Now, under the golden light of late day, Tao ran her fingers gently over the patterns. She traced the curve of a heron's wing, the spiral at the center, the tiny hands of the paddlers. Her breath slowed, her spine relaxed, her song returned, but this time only in her thoughts. Some believe that the drum was once used to gather people, not only for ceremony, but for ordinary things, announcing the start of planting, calling fishermen home before storms, signaling a funeral when words felt too small. Others said it marked the sun, that its patterns followed the turning of the year, etched in lines of migration and flood. The truth was unclear. Perhaps that was the point. Not everything needed to be known to be understood. Not everything needed to be named to be remembered. The drum sat, unmoved, but its presence shaped the silence. Later that evening, an elder stopped by the longhouse. His knees bent slowly as he lowered himself to the stool beside the entrance. He saw Tao sitting near the drum, eyes half closed, and smiled. "Listening to old songs?" he asked. She opened her eyes and nodded. He did not speak again. He simply reached into the pouch at his waist and pulled out a few beetle leaves, chewing them slowly, thoughtfully. Together, they watched the light fade. A few fireflies began to blink beyond the doorway. The elder reached out and gently lifted one corner of the palm mat covering the drum. He tapped the surface softly with the back of his knuckle. A single tone emerged. Low, round, soft. It did not echo. It did not rush. It simply was. And for a moment, Tao felt that something very old had stirred. Not to speak, but to open its eyes. The elder replaced the mat. "The rain will come soon," he said. Then he stood and walked away. Tao remained. She watched the last of the light leave the longhouse, folding itself into the night like a bird into its nest. And the drum waited, as always, for no one. But it heard everything. In a village by the river, there were two still houses that stood a little taller than the rest. Not much taller, just enough for the difference to be noticed. The extra height was not a matter of pride, but of design. The families who lived there were known for bronze work. Their ancestors had once traveled across valleys, through bamboo forests and mangrove plains, in search of copper veins and clay rich enough to shape a mold that would not break under fire. Now they stayed mostly in place. The rivers had grown quieter. Trade had changed its routes, but the knowledge remained, passed through calloused hands, quiet workshops, and long afternoons spent near glowing furnaces. The house at the western inn belonged to an elder named Mock. He was not a chief. He was not a priest, but his house had a small veranda with carved railings. And inside, above the hearth, hung a ceremonial bowl made of polished bronze, with silver inlays shaped like fish circling a moon. No one in the village owned anything like it. It was not shown often, only during offerings at the star planting, or when a storm broke earlier than expected and the elders gathered to burn herbs and speak softly to the wind. Mock did not speak of the bowl as treasure. He called it memory. He said his great-grandfather had poured the metal for it on the last day of a long drought. The first raindrop had fallen as the mold was opened, and so it was never sold, never traded. It hung quietly behind a screen of dry pandan leaves, catching light when no one was looking. Mock had two grandchildren, boys, both thin and light-footed, with the same quiet eyes. They were not expected to work in the forge yet, but they swept its floor each morning and gathered kindling for the furnace each night. They knew how to wrap the tongs with wet cloth before lifting hot metal, and how to mix crushed charcoal with fine sand to polish a blade without dulling its edge. Their father had left the village many seasons ago. It was said he had followed a river merchant southward, chasing a promise of better pay and easier roads. He had ridden once, then never again, but the boys remained, and Mock raised them as he had once raised copper from stone, with patience, with breath, and with long silences that made room for understanding. Every morning, just after the cocks had called, but before the sun reached the floorboards, Mock sat on the edge of the platform and listened. He did not listen for birds. He listened for tools. A blacksmith's rasp, a bronze caster's tap, the sigh of fire being coaxed into flame. He believed a village should wake with work, not for profit, but for rhythm. And in that rhythm, he found a kind of peace. Across the square, another house stood, shorter, less adorned, shaded by a papaya tree that dropped fruit too early. This house belonged to a woman named Nan. She wove mats for a living. She had no veranda, only a wooden bench balanced on uneven legs. Her mats were sold in bundles to traders passing through on the way to higher hills. She dyed them with crushed seeds and boiled leaves, but rarely kept the prettiest ones for herself. Her roof leaked in one corner. Her stairs creaked, and yet, every child who passed her house slowed their step, not out of pity, but because Nan kept birds, not in cages, in stories. She fed the wild ones, sunbirds, bulbuls, sometimes even a passing cuckoo. She left banana slices and water by her door, and when the birds came, she greeted them with short phrases spoken softly, as if they were kin. She had no silver bowl, but her words sparkled like it. Once, long ago, she had worked as a house attendant in a noble court upriver. No one knew which one. She did not say, but she spoke of silk not as something precious, but as something ordinary. She had once remarked that the finest mulberry cloth made her itch. Mock and Nan had known each other since childhood. They did not speak often now, but sometimes at the edge of a gathering or near the market, they would nod. Sometimes Mock would send the boys with a bundle of dry firewood when the rains came early. Sometimes Nan would send a wrapped parcel of steamed cassava to the forge on festival mornings. Neither mentioned the gifts when they arrived. In the forge, the bronze work continued. Mock's bowl remained polished. Its silver fish never changed direction. And yet, outside the house, the boys watched Nan's birds circle above the square. They saw the way she stood in the sun, her hands still as branches, her gaze steady on the sky. They did not say it aloud, but they sometimes wondered, why was it that her stories felt brighter than the bowl? Why did the air around her seem lighter? They asked their grandfather once, while watching the forge cool. He smiled, then said nothing. Later that night, one of the boys dreamed of a bowl. Not one made of metal, but one made of wind. It held no water. It held no grain. But when he tipped it sideways, it spilled song. In the early morning, Mock sat once more at the edge of the platform. He tapped his walking stick lightly on the floor. The birds stirred in Nan's tree. The sky grew slowly gold. And the village woke, not with power, not with pride, but with the soft harmony of difference. Bronze and birds, bowl and story. One held shape, the other gave flight, and both, in their way, helped the day begin. The land held its secrets softly. Beneath the rice paddies and fig trees, beneath the bamboo roots and wandering streams, there were circles pressed into the earth. Not deep, not wide, just enough to change the way the grass grew. Just enough to make the children pause as they ran, noticing how the soil felt different under their soles. No one remembered who had made them. They had no markers, no stones, no offerings. Just rings of hardened earth, always forming in threes. Always shallow, slightly ridged, as if once smoothed by a wide wooden paddle. If you stood in the center of one and faced the sunrise, the hills would seem to bend around you. Not dramatically, just slightly. Enough to make you wonder whether the place had been chosen with care. Tao had found one again that morning. The mist was low, brushing the tops of the rice stalks like a slow hand. She had followed the path beyond the longhouse, where the paddies met the wild reeds, and stepped into a clearing where frogs sang from puddles and banana leaves hung heavy with rain. There, underfoot, was the circle, barely visible, just a faint line of earth firmer than the rest. She had seen one before, years earlier, near the northern tree line. A woman from the weaving circle had told her then that the circles were once part of a game played by children before the bronze drums were made. Or perhaps they were dance floors for ancestors. Or perhaps not. Everyone had a different answer. No one said the same thing twice. That was how Tao knew it was something worth remembering. She stepped carefully into the center of the ring. The light had shifted now, softened by the rising sun. It filtered through the mist in warm gold and pale green, touching the edge of every leaf, every blade of grass, every water droplet trembling on the reeds. The air smelled of wet soil and old bark. She knelt, pressing one palm against the ground. The earth was cool, firm, not hard but settled, like something had once been placed there. A stone, a bowl, a drum? She did not ask. She only sat quietly, letting her breath settle into the rhythm of the bird song. Not far from the circle, a faded trail led uphill through groves of acacia and wild ginger. The elders said that long ago, people climbed the trail carrying bundles of herbs and bowls of dyed rice. They said that at the top was a place where offerings were once placed, not for gods or rulers, but for the wind. No one climbed the trail anymore, but sometimes a few villagers still left flowers by its entrance. Not as an offering, just as a gesture, a memory without obligation. Tao stood, brushing soil from her hands, and followed the path. Her steps were soft, her sandals soaked. The forest was quiet here, not silent, but thoughtful. A squirrel darted across a low branch, its tail wet with dew. Somewhere above, a coal called once, then fell still. The trail curved gently, weaving between tall ferns and tangled vines. Halfway up, she paused. To her right was another circle. This one was clearer, framed by moss, lined with broken ceramic, just fragments, edges smoothed by time, a shard of deep green glaze, shaped like the lip of a bowl. Another, ochre-colored and etched with a wave pattern, now faded to almost nothing. She touched the pieces gently. They were not sharp. They had been here long enough to forget how to cut. Tao sat on a dry stone and looked around. The trees whispered. No one was here. Not now. But she could feel the echo of something. Not a presence. A pattern. Years ago, one of the elders, Mock, the bronze worker, had told her about the hidden shells in the earth. He had found one while digging a fire pit behind his house. A layer of blackened earth, smooth and dry, buried beneath the red clay. On that layer had rested a circle of stones, arranged just so. He had not disturbed them. He had simply covered the spot again and moved the fire elsewhere. Some things, he had said, are meant to sleep. The path climbed higher. At the top, the trees opened into a broad flat ledge, where the wind moved freely. The view stretched beyond the paddies to the blue-gray outline of distant rivers. The clouds drifted low, casting soft shadows over the fields. Tao walked to the center and found a depression in the stone. Shallow, round, a basin. It held water, clear, rain-fed, and edged with moss. She sat beside it. The wind touched her face, gentle and cool. The scent of burnt grass and distant smoke floated by, mixed with the faint sweetness of fallen flowers. She imagined a gathering here, long ago, not loud, not grand, just people, moving in rhythm, carrying bundles of rice, placing bowls on the stone, pouring water, lighting herbs, not because they believed it would change the world, but because it helped them feel the world more clearly. One year, a traveling trader had passed through the village and spoken of a place far to the east, where circles like this were found beneath the foundations of temples. He had said they were older than memory, that no one knew their meaning. But still, people swept them clean. Tao dipped her fingers into the water basin. It was cold and clear. It smelled of stone and morning. She let the drops fall from her fingers back into the bowl. Each one returned with a sound so faint, it was almost not a sound at all. Just a reminder, a whisper. She stayed until the clouds thinned and the sun turned the edge of the trees to gold. Then she stood. She did not mark the place, did not gather the shards, did not speak. She simply walked back down the trail, past the birds, past the leaves, past the rings in the earth that no one quite remembered. And as she returned to the village, the wind stirred again, brushing the top of the longhouse and rustling the cloth tied to the ancestral shrine. The circle remained behind her, unchanged, unexplained, and utterly complete. There was a pattern beneath the hearth, not drawn with ink and not etched in stone. It was made of clay, pressed by hand, before the house had ever been built. You wouldn't know it was there unless someone told you. And even then, it was hard to believe, because the floor looked like any other, worn smooth by feet, smudged with ash, layered with years of sweeping and water spilled from wooden ladles. But once, during the dry season, when a neighbor's house was being rebuilt after a windstorm, the clay beneath the hearth was uncovered. And in that thin layer between earth and ash, they found it. Circles again, not large ones, just the size of 2 cup palms, arranged in a ring, pressed with the end of a gourd stem. And in the very center, a small triangle made with a fingertip. No one knew what it meant. The elders said it was not uncommon, that other houses had found the same thing. Always under the hearth, always quiet, never explained. Some believed it was placed to protect the fire. Others said it was a guide for the smoke. A few said nothing at all, only nodding slowly, as if reminded of something half forgotten from a long time ago. The clay was covered again the next day. A new hearth was built, and rice was cooked as usual, with garlic and ginger and fish sauce stirred into the steam. The pattern was not destroyed. It was simply put back to sleep. Years later, a girl named Lean remembered it while sweeping her family's kitchen. She was not thinking about history. She was not thinking about symbols. She was thinking about how the clay floor felt cool beneath her feet, and how the broom made the softest sound when it moved in circles. She was thinking about her grandmother, who had always swept the same way, starting from the outside and moving in, as though drawing the day toward the center. Lean paused beside the hearth and touched the floor. It was slightly uneven, not broken, just settled. She ran her fingers along a ridge no one else noticed, a rise the width of her finger, and she wondered, quietly, if there was something just beneath it, still holding shape in the dark. She didn't tell anyone, not because it was a secret, but because it felt private, a quiet thought resting under the firewood. That evening, as the sun lowered and the crickets began their chorus, Lean sat by the hearth and watched her grandmother stir a pot of mung bean porridge. The room smelled of pandan and warm rice. Outside, the chickens settled in the coop, feathers rustling. The light from the fire painted everything in slow, orange tones. Lean listened to her grandmother's breathing, steady, soft, with a faint rasp from years of smoke. She asked, without looking up, "Did you ever see the marks beneath the floor?" Her grandmother paused for just a moment, then stirred the pot again. "They're not meant to be seen often," she said. "Did you put them there?" "No." "Then who?" Her grandmother blew gently into the pot and tasted the porridge. She did not answer right away. Then she said, "I think someone once hoped the fire would remember them." And that was all. The porridge was served. The bowls were passed. The night moved on. But the idea lingered. Lean began to notice things. Not dramatic things. Just small choices. How her mother always stepped with her right foot first when entering the kitchen. How the fire was never started until after a single leaf was placed near the coals. How every time a pot cracked, it was not thrown away, but left beside the fence until the next storm. She asked once, "Why don't we bury broken pots?" Her uncle had shrugged. The ground already holds enough stories. There was no ceremony, no doctrine, just gestures, worn into habit, smoothed by time. Lean began to keep a journal, though she didn't write much. Just single lines. Things she saw, things she heard. She wrote, broom in circles, not lines. First step, right foot. Ash settles where the fire forgets. Don't wake a pot too quickly. She wasn't sure what she was collecting, but the act of noticing made her feel close to something quiet and old. Once, during a particularly long dry spell, the family hearth was repaired. A crack had appeared, just wide enough for ants to build a path through the floor. Lean helped pack new clay around the base, mixing water with river sand, smoothing it with the heel of her palm. Before she was finished, she pressed a circle into the center of the patch, then a smaller one inside it, and finally, a triangle at the edge. No one saw her do it. She didn't need them to. It wasn't for explanation. It was for remembering. Years later, when the house changed hands, the new owners did not know about the circles. They cooked their rice. They lit their fires. The clay beneath their feet held steady, and the mark slept on, untouched. Some nights, Lean returned to the house in dreams, not to see the hearth, but to sweep, and in the quiet rhythm of her sweeping, she sometimes heard a voice. Not her grandmother's, not her own, just a voice shaped like warmth and memory, saying nothing, asking nothing, only existing. And beneath her, the floor whispered with the soft breath of those who had come before, drawing comfort from the warmth above them. It was not marked on any map. The bend in the river that turned, then turned again, passing a narrow ridge of sandstone and disappearing behind a screen of bamboo. The water there ran more slowly, as though caught in thought. Fish swam deeper at that bend, and lilies gathered in clusters near the bank, their petals pale against the green water. The villagers called it the second turning. They said the river remembered something there. Not a person, not an event, just a pause. A place where something had once happened, and now lingered quietly, without explanation. No one built houses nearby. The soil was too soft, and the mist too heavy in early mornings. But sometimes children would go to the bend to gather fallen flowers, or to fish, sitting on smooth rocks warmed by the afternoon sun. It was there, at the second turning, that a boy named Din found the stone. He hadn't been looking for anything, only watching his line, waiting for a small tug, hoping for a silver carp. The water was calm that day, clear, and beneath it, just beyond the shadow of his line, something pale caught the light. Not a fish, not a shell. He reached into the water and pulled it out. A stone, not large, smooth, oval, with markings, not letters, just lines. 3 of them, curved slightly, almost like the path of the river itself. He turned the stone in his hand. It was cool, not cold, and when he pressed it against his forehead, it held the scent of river clay and damp reed. He showed it to his grandfather that evening. The old man looked at it for a long time, then said, "Put it back." "What?" Din asked. The old man shook his head gently. "Not everything is meant to follow you home." Din returned to the river the next day, but he did not throw the stone. He placed it on the bank, where the water could reach it when the tide rose. Then he sat for a while, watching the lilies drift, their leaves bobbing gently in the current. When he returned a week later, the stone was gone. In its place were 2 others, unmarked, smaller, balanced side by side, as if left with intention. He said nothing to anyone, but he began visiting the second, turning more often. Not a fish, not a look, just a sit. Over time, He noticed things, small things. The way birds flew in a slow arc above the bend, circling once before heading west. The way the fog held longer over that stretch of water, even after the sun rose high. The way frogs were quiet there, their usual songs replaced by silence. He found more stones, not every time, but often enough to expect them. Some were plain, others had faint marks, crosses, waves, single dots pressed with a stick or finger. No two were the same. He began arranging them, not in patterns, just in circles or lines that curved along the shore. Then he would sit nearby, listening. There was no sound of drums, no voice from the trees, only the soft lap of water against stone. And once, the cry of a heron echoing low from the bamboo grove. Years passed. Din grew older. He left the village for a time, worked on boats, learned to mend sails, saw other rivers, wider and faster, rivers that never turned twice. But the bend stayed with him, in dreams, in quiet moments, in the way he traced circles in the dust while waiting for stew to boil. When he returned, the second turning was the same, still slow, still green, still curved like a thought repeating itself. He found a child sitting there, watching the water. She looked up as he approached. "They come when the fog stays long," she said. He nodded. "You've seen them too?" She shrugged. "I leave mine near the reeds. They always move." Together, they sat by the river, the air soft with dragonfly wings and the scent of wet bark. The stones did not speak, but the river moved gently, carrying with it a quiet memory no one had written down. Just shapes, left by hands, passed between seasons, not lost, not named, simply placed. And when the sun sank low, painting the mist with amber, they stood and walked back toward the village. The second turning remained behind them, still curving, still remembering, still waiting for someone to sit and listen. Long before the village paths were drawn in sandals and smoke, before the river was named and paddled and netted, before the bronze drums were cast and carried to hearths, there were hands that made marks in the mud, not to record, not to instruct, but to rest, to press something of the body into the earth and let it stay quiet and unmoving long after the hands themselves were gone. There were stories about such marks, faint, half-spoken stories, passed not from book to book, but from breath to breath, told not as declarations, but as pauses between tasks. A potter would mention it while shaping the curve of a bowl. A fisherman might recall it while repairing a net, his fingers slow and knotted with age. Stories of rings found under old hearths, of stones stacked with no reason, of patterns in the river silt after a long storm, shaped like animals no one remembered. Sometimes, in the quiet season between harvest and flood, the children would wander into the fallow fields, following nothing in particular. They would come back with questions about indentations in the dry earth, shallow dips, spirals, or tiny rows that curved toward nowhere. The elders would say, "Those are just where the rain's Saturday." But not all the children believed it, and not all the elders said it with certainty. There was one boy, named Hien, who collected such questions, not with notebooks or maps, only with memory. He had a careful way of walking, always watching the ground, always pausing at the edge of puddles and shadows. He asked things that made people smile gently before returning to their work, not because his questions were foolish, but because they were shaped like dreams. One morning, while helping clear a patch of land for planting taro, he uncovered something, a line of stones buried just beneath the topsoil, small, rounded, not laid in a row, but in a curve like a sleeping fish. Each stone had a small hole bored through the middle, smooth at the edges. There were 7 in total. The others moved on. The land needed clearing. The season was late, but Hien stayed. He sat beside the curve of stones, brushing them gently with a bundle of grass, watching the way the dust lifted and settled in the breeze. He asked no questions this time. He only listened. The wind moved through the banana leaves. Birds turned their songs to the west. Somewhere in the distance, a bronze drum sounded. Once, then fell silent again. He did not take the stones. He simply gathered nearby twigs and framed the curve with care, as though tucking a child into sleep. Then he returned home, his palms still dusted with the soil that had held the line for longer than anyone could say. Years later, when he was grown and bent with age, he would still remember the exact shape of that curve. He would trace it on the inside of his wrist when waiting for the pot to boil, or mark it with his finger in rice flour on the kitchen table, just before wiping it away. He never told anyone where he had seen it, not because it was a secret, but because some things fade better when left in place. Even now, the land shifts with the weather. New rains fall. Trees lean differently than they did before. The riverbank crumbles in places, and new bamboo shoots rise quickly, only to be split for baskets or fences. The village keeps changing, and yet, certain patterns remain. Circles appear in the grass after a storm. Lines of stones are turned up by curious dogs near the shrine. Someone finds a shell with carvings beside a mound of dry earth, and no one rushes to explain. They pause. They notice. They nod. A cloth is placed nearby, or a flower, or nothing at all, just a breath, a space left undisturbed. There are no ceremonies for these things, only moments. A woman walking home after feeding the chickens stops at the edge of a rice paddy, where the water has pooled into an odd shape. She does not step into it. She watches it reflect the clouds for a moment, then moves on. A child draws in the dust with a stick, circles, waves, then lines them with stones, only to scatter them before evening. A boy drops a seed into the ground, only to find a shard of pottery with grooves along the rim. He wipes it clean, smells it, then places it back, carefully, a little deeper than before. No one writes it down, but everyone remembers. Not exactly what was found, only that it was there, waiting. The bronze drum is struck again, perhaps for a wedding, or for the return of migrating birds. Its low sound drifts through the valley, brushing over rooftops and through groves. The sound passes the old path near the river bend. It lingers near the longhouse, and for a moment, it hovers near the hearth of the oldest home in the village, where no one is currently awake. Outside that house, the soil is dry, but under the surface, there may be a circle, or a mark, or nothing at all. It doesn't matter. The people here have learned how to listen to things that are no longer loud. They have grown used to stories that do not begin or end. They have watched rain fill the same footprints year after year, and have come to understand that sometimes the shape left behind is enough. A leaf pressed into the path, a knot in wood that resembles an eye, a silence that arrives too evenly to be forgotten. As night folds over the village again, and the oil lamps burn low, someone hums a tune no longer remembered in full. The melody curls upward, soft as steam, and disappears through the roof. Beyond the square, beneath the jackfruit tree, a stone rests beside a root. Its surface is smooth, its purpose unknown, but it holds the warmth of the day in its belly. And that is enough. The pavilion was built on a rise, not high enough to see the sea, but high enough to avoid its mood. The land around it was trimmed and tidied. Small groves of sweet lime and torch ginger planted in careful curves, their roots bound by stones hand-carried from a river 2 valleys away. A wide path led to the entrance, where 2 lacquered water jars sat on either side. They were not used for drinking, only reflection. Each morning, before the sun reached the roof tiles, a servant would dust their rims with a cloth dipped in clove water. Not because it cleaned better than plain water, but because it pleased the mistress to smell something sharp in the early hours. The house itself was made of hardwood, polished daily, with joints fitted so tightly the wind could not find its way through. Silk curtains hung from carved beams, dyed in shades of mulberry and saffron, and drawn back with cords twisted from raw cotton and golden thread. When the wind moved through them, the sound was almost musical, like cloth remembering a song. Inside the pavilion, everything was soft. The floor mats, the cushions, the voices. Even the footsteps of the attendants made no sound. They had been trained to walk without weight, gliding more than stepping. Each movement learned by watching their predecessors and rehearsing on stone at dusk. They did not speak unless spoken to, and when they did, their tones were measured, shaped like water poured from a cup. The mistress of the house rose late, not by the sun, but by the scent of her morning bowl. A thin broth infused with young ginger and mushroom, sweetened slightly with lotus seed, and poured over soft rice. It was always brought at the same hour, always served in a bowl shaped like a curled moon, made from white glazed ceramic that hummed when tapped. She never ate all of it, just 3 spoonfuls, stirred clockwise, then left to cool. She believed it balanced her thoughts. The attendants cleared it away without comment. They folded the silk napkin as if it might bruise and replaced it with a shallow dish of crushed beetle leaf and clove for breath. Then they brushed her hair with a comb carved from ivory-colored wood, slow and silent, drawing long threads of oil through the ends. Not a word was said. Outside, the world moved faster. Children shouted near rice paddies. Smoke rose from hearths. Water buffaloes trudged through thick soil. But from within the walls of the pavilion, those sounds seemed distant, like wind across the surface of a drum that no longer needed to be played. After her hair was dressed and her robe arranged, pale silk over darker silk, with cuffs embroidered in fishbone patterns, the mistress sat by the north window. She did not look out. She looked toward. It was not the view that pleased her. It was the light, filtered through the latticework. It arrived soft and diffused, painting the floor in squares. The shadow of a bird might pass once every hour. A leaf might fall and land soundlessly. These were the events that marked her morning. A woman of her status did not sew. That was for others. She did not cook, nor read aloud, but she did arrange. On a lacquer tray near her elbow, small objects waited to be placed. A fan made from layered goose feathers, a small brush for scenting robes, a folded cloth printed with cinnabar ink, patterned in reeds and reeds alone. She moved them slightly, aligned them, changed her mind, then left them as they were. It was a ritual without goal, but not without purpose. She often thought that peace was a matter of precision. At midday, the gong sounded from the garden wall. Not loud, not eager, just a single note to remind the house that lunch would be served soon. In the kitchen yard behind the pavilion, a line of servants worked over earthen stoves, stirring slow stews and peeling jackfruit into bowls of salted water. Their hands moved quickly. Their feet, always bare, pressed ash into the clay. None of them spoke above a whisper. By the time the trays reached the dining platform, the food was no longer hot. But that was preferred. Cool dishes sat better in the stomach, she said. They kept the mind from rising too quickly in the heat. She tasted a pickled flower, sipped a broth flavored with tamarind, nibbled a sliver of roast banana, dusted with crushed sesame, then motioned for the tray to be taken away. In another room, her son studied calligraphy. He was 12, already taller than she remembered from the last monsoon. A tutor sat beside him, correcting posture, adjusting grip, encouraging restraint. The boy was bright, but restless. He made too much eye contact. He asked too many questions. He wanted to know why the characters for Cloud and Dream shared the same root. The tutor had no answer, only a shrug. The mistress overheard this and smiled softly. She had once asked the same question. That evening, as the sky began to shift toward dusk, the pavilion was prepared for cooling. Silk screens were unhooked and rolled back. Mats were shaken and dusted. The servants lit coils of dried bark that released a smoky sweetness into the halls. Camphor and cinnamon, burned not for scent alone, but to remind the air it had been noticed. The mistress sat once more by the window. She watched a bird land on the branch of a nearby tree. It looked at her, tilted its head, then flew away. She did not move. She did not need to. This was a life that required little motion. Her feet were soft, her nails polished with crushed pearls, her voice barely used, and yet she felt the weight of each hour like silk draped across her shoulders. In moments of stillness, she sometimes thought of the time before this pavilion, of riverbanks and mud paths, of summer afternoons spent under mango trees, chewing fibrous stems and watching ants march over mossy stone. She had not walked barefoot in years. She wondered if the earth still felt the same. As the sky deepened, her robe was changed again. This one was darker, lined with fine muslin to keep her cool through the night. A tray of scented water was brought for her to rinse her fingers. A bowl of rice porridge, thinner than morning's, was placed beside her bed. Outside, the sounds of the village began to fade. The frogs called. A bamboo chime clinked once, then fell silent. Somewhere in the hills, a drum sounded, slow and low. She looked up, not startled, just attentive. The tone rolled through the night air and passed through the open walls of the pavilion like breath. It did not disturb her. She listened, then turned her gaze back to the silk screen beside her. It was printed with the image of a lotus, but the petals were arranged in a pattern she had never seen in life. Softer, fuller, almost too symmetrical to exist. She reached out and touched the edge of the screen. It did not yield. It never did. He was known, quietly, for his umbrella, not because it was grand, and not because it was ever used, but because it was carried. Each morning, before the sun climbed over the hills, a young attendant would step out from the left side of the sleeping quarters and unfold it slowly, turning the bamboo ribs until the fabric stretched wide and smooth, then holding it upright in the air without letting it sway. The man himself did not step into the sun for nearly an hour, but the umbrella would wait, as still as a tree held by human hands. It was made from fine silk, dyed a shade between moss and smoke. The inner edge was painted with thin white reeds, all bending to the left, though no one knew why. Some thought it was an accident. Others said it was deliberate, to mirror the way wind moves before the monsoon. When the man finally emerged, he did not speak. He nodded, once, to acknowledge the umbrella, then walked beneath it, slowly, along the gravel path that circled his estate. He did not carry it himself. His hands were always empty. One hand would occasionally touch the edge of his robe. The other remained behind his back. He wore sandals laced with colored thread. They were never used outside the estate. When he traveled, he rode in a closed palanquin, with screens drawn low to avoid dust. He had not touched mud in years. It was not a matter of vanity, only preference. He believed the earth should remain as it was, undisturbed, not rearranged for convenience. His garden was proof of this belief, meticulously wild, with ponds that curved without symmetry and stones placed where they had first been found. There were fish in those ponds, long, pale, slow-moving, fed with a special mixture of ground lentil, bitter root, and ash. The recipe had been passed down through 4 generations of caretakers. No one had tasted it. It smelled of old rice and burnt bark. Each morning, as he walked the loop beneath the umbrella, he would stop at the center pond and watch the fish rise and turn. He did not feed them himself. That task belonged to a boy with quiet hands, who knelt on the same rock each day and dropped the food in 3 parts. Always 3, never more. The man would watch for a moment, then move on. He never looked at the boy, only the fish. He was a man of routines. Each garment had a season. Each hour had a sound. At sunrise, there was a bell, low and deep, rung once by an attendant in the outer kitchen. It did not call anyone. It did not begin anything. It only announced the hour had passed. At mid-morning, incense was lit, not the common kind. It was imported from somewhere upriver, pressed into tight coils and wrapped in lotus leaves. The smell was faint, cool, like paper that had once been wet, then dried in shade. Lunch arrived in 6 bowls. The number never changed. Neither did the pattern. Rice in the center, greens to the left, fish to the right, pickled root on a smaller dish just beyond the rice. Soup in a lidded bowl, set apart but not far. A thin fruit paste, folded in leaf, beside the soup. He did not eat all of it, but it was important that it arrived. His attendants rotated the bowls between bites, so each remained symmetrical in presentation. He rarely commented, except when the fish was oversteamed, that he would mention, gently, as if discussing cloud formation or the tone of a drum he once heard as a child. He had never been cruel, only exact. Once, many years earlier, a young man had arrived at his estate, sent by a cousin to serve as a scribe. The boy had quick eyes and a sharp tongue, always asking questions in bursts. He had noticed, too early, the small absurdities. The umbrella raised before sunrise, the soup that no one drank, the garden pond where the fish were never touched. He had asked, during dinner, why the bowl of pickled root is replaced daily if no one eats it. The man had paused, then said, softly, because I might. The boy did not stay long. It was not punishment, only quiet dismissal. There were no raised voices, just a sealed letter sent to the cousin. The next day, the boy was gone, and the umbrella was raised, as usual, just after dawn. The man never spoke of him again. He spent most afternoons in the tea pavilion. It was a small structure, slightly detached from the main house, raised on 4 stone legs and open to the west. The roof was made of split wrought tan, tightly bound, and the walls were latticed with driftwood painted white. He never drank tea alone, but the company was chosen carefully. A former court musician, a healer who no longer practiced, an old woman who once embroidered official robes for a provincial governor. They came quietly, sat cross-legged on mats that creaked softly beneath them, and drank slowly. No politics, no philosophy, only observations. The rain feels closer today. This season, the ants build higher. The fish are not turning as they did last year. The man would nod, sometimes smile, and offer dried ginger slices as a gesture of approval. As the sky faded into evening, the umbrella was folded and set aside. The servant who carried it would clean the ribs with silk cloth and hang it in the storeroom beside the baskets of dry lotus stem and the jars of preserved salt plum. The man would sit near the courtyard pond, now dark and still, and listen, not for conversation, just for sound. A frog moving, the brush of wind on water, the shuffle of an attendant placing a bowl in the outer hall. And in those hours, the weight of his day would shift slightly. Not lift, not fall, just shift. Enough to feel the outline of a life made from lines, not shapes. He had never known poverty. He had rarely known uncertainty. But sometimes, in the dimness of twilight, he wondered what it would be like to wear no robe at all, to feel the stone floor against his back, to walk barefoot to the edge of the pond, not to observe, but to leap, not with purpose, not with fear, just a leap. Then he would fold his hands behind him and return inside. The umbrella would be ready again in the morning. There was a courtyard where the air never quite moved. It was enclosed on 3 sides, shaded by a roof of curved tiles and trailing vines. The 4th side opened to a garden pond, but even there, the water did not ripple. Lotus leaves lay flat against the surface, their stems unmoving. The occasional dragonfly hovered, uncertain, then drifted elsewhere. It was the quietest place in the estate, and it belonged to the woman who never raised her voice. She was not the lady of the house. That role belonged to someone else, someone who oversaw menus and drapery and the ordering of imported spices. This woman had no title, but the attendants referred to her as the fragrant one. She did not walk without notice, though she tried. Her scent arrived before she did, not loudly but distinctly, a layered perfume of crushed orchid, rice oil, and a trace of something more bitter, perhaps clove or dried lime peel. The fragrance clung to the folds of her robes, to the sleeves of her night wraps, to the smooth stones on which she stepped. No one could remember when the ritual had begun. It was said that, as a girl, she had fallen into a vat of rosewater mint for an imperial gift. The story was never confirmed. She did not offer corrections, but every morning, the bath was drawn with care. The water was warmed in clay pots and poured into a shallow stone basin polished smooth by time. A servant would sprinkle dried petals onto the surface, blue lotus, marigold, and rice flower, then stir them gently until they circled like small, obedient boats. She would enter slowly, always with her left foot first. No one watched. Only one attendant remained in the corner, head lowered, holding a towel that smelled faintly of basil. She did not speak during the bath, not because she was solemn, but because the moment required stillness. Afterwards, her skin was dried with fabric that had been smoked over tea leaves. It left no residue, only scent. Then a powder was applied, fine, nearly weightless, pressed in her neck and wrists with soft cloth pads dyed in green tea. The powder shimmered faintly in the light, though no one called it gold. The robes she wore afterwards were pale and nearly translucent, layer upon layer of them, always arranged in descending hues. The top was colorless, the middle like morning mist, the innermost one tinged the color of river silt after a flood. She rarely left the courtyard. Sometimes she walked to the edge of the pond to feed the fish with morsels rolled from dried melon and pressed rice. The fish did not respond with urgency. They rose slowly, gently, their mouths just brushing the surface before vanishing again. Her presence did not command. It curated. She spent her afternoons arranging petals, not in vases, on trays. She would gather fallen flowers, never plucked, and place them on lacquered wood, grouping them not by color or size, but by texture, crumpled beside whole, wilted beside young. Sometimes she left gaps between them, as if allowing the absence to say something the blossoms could not. Visitors came rarely. When they did, they bowed too deeply and left too quickly. No one quite knew what to say to a woman who sat without posture, whose silence had a structure more intricate than language. Once, during a festival, a court officer was brought to the estate. He was young, embroidered in haste, and eager to impress. When introduced to the fragrant woman, he attempted flattery. He said, "Your robes carry the light better than the lanterns." She looked at him, only for a moment, then replied, "That is because my robes are made of stillness." He smiled politely and said no more. That night, he left earlier than planned. It was not cruelty, only precision. She kept few possessions: a comb with missing teeth, a lacquer box filled with dried ginger root, a bundle of old scrolls, unread and mostly unrolled, tied with faded cord. Once, a servant found a bronze hairpin beneath her sleeping mat. It was shaped like a heron. When asked if she wished to keep it, she said, "If it no longer holds my hair, let it hold the earth." It was placed beneath a tree and forgotten. When rain fell, as it did sometimes in soft sheets, she would sit beneath the covered roof and listen. Her fingers did not tap. Her hands did not ring. She only sat, letting the scent of damp soil and drifting blossoms rise to meet her. It was during one such rain that a child entered the courtyard. Not with intention, just wandering. The child stopped, wide-eyed, not from fear but from surprise. The woman looked at her and said nothing. The child stared at the basin, now filled with rainwater and scattered petals, each spinning slowly in its own time. Then, after a long pause, the child asked, "Do the flowers mind the water?" The woman smiled, not widely but completely. "They only mind being asked to bloom again." The child nodded, as if this answered something she hadn't known to ask. Then she turned and left. The woman did not follow. The petals kept turning, and the rain softened, as though it too understood it had been heard. In the evening, a light was lit in the far corner of the courtyard. Not a lamp, not a torch, a small bowl of oil with a floating wick, perfumed with sandalwood, and held in a dish carved from gourd. It gave off little light, only glow, enough to see the edge of a sleeve, the rim of the water basin, the outline of someone waiting for night to come without urgency. She did not ask to be remembered, and so no one forgot her. On the hill above the tamarind grove, there was a house that echoed more than it spoke. It was not large, though its roof was wide and its beams were carved with care. The doors were tall, but left open most of the day. Inside, the floors were polished to a dull gleam, too smooth for sandals, too cool for barefoot walking without awareness. Every footfall carried the sound of thought. The house belonged to an official of modest distinction, not a governor, not a general, just high enough to sign papers that others could not, just important enough to host visitors who wore robes with wider sleeves. His name was spoken quietly, though he was not feared. He was respected, because he was consistent. Each morning, he stepped on the same wooden plank just before breakfast, not by design, but by rhythm. He paused briefly, not to survey his garden, but to listen to the way the board creaked beneath his weight. He had told a guest once that it was the only sound in his life not dictated by someone else. His meals were precise: thin rice porridge on even days, steamed taro root on odd ones, a sprig of pickled mustard beside each bowl, always arranged with the curve facing left. No one knew why. His servants never asked. He never ate until the bells had finished sounding from the watchtower beyond the fields. The bells were not his concern, but he waited for them. It gave the day a beginning, even if the content of it rarely changed. He sat at a low table facing the courtyard, not because the view was particularly beautiful, but because it allowed him to observe the shadow of the tree as it shifted across the tiles. He once wrote a letter to a cousin describing the shadow as a clock made of silence. The cousin never replied. He wrote many letters. Some were never sent. He kept them in a box carved from jackfruit wood, each labeled in a hand only he could read. They contained musings on weather, on the texture of roof tiles after rain, on the way a servant's cough echoed differently from the east wing than from the west. The servants respected him. They said he was kind, because he never raised his voice, because he never forgot their names, because he always paid attention, even when nothing was being asked. And yet, he was always apart. He sat in rooms the others did not enter. He walked through gardens where no footprints followed. He listened to music, but only from behind a curtain. A zither player came twice a month. She sat in the outer hall, tuned her strings, and played with steady fingers. He never addressed her. She never looked for his face. Between them, only the vibration of plucked notes, crossing a space too wide to measure. Once a boy asked if the official was lonely. An older servant smiled and said no. He just wears silence like a robe. The boy didn't understand, but nodded anyway. The official's clothing was simple. Soft linen, faded hues, a sash of gray that never needed adjusting. He did not dress for display, but his garments were always immaculate, ironed by hand on a smooth plank warmed by coals. The woman who did the ironing never spoke of her work, but she often paused to smell the fabric before folding it. She said it smelled like paper in afternoon. The official had a wife, or perhaps had once had one. There were signs. 2 teacups always placed on the tray, though only one ever held liquid. A comb with long hair wrapped around its teeth. A faded ribbon tied around a beam in the sleeping room, untouched for many seasons. He never mentioned her, but when the lotus flowers bloomed, he placed one on the stone pedestal beside the gate. Every year, always white, never pink. The house was known for its quietness. Birds avoided nesting in the eaves. Wind passed through it like a guest who had stayed too long. Even the dogs barked less near its walls. And yet, there was a kind of fullness there, not of activity, but of weight. A bowl that was not empty, just resting between uses. Once a month, the official received a scroll from the provincial court. It was delivered with ceremony, an escort, a bow, a stamped seal, but he rarely responded. He would read it slowly, under the tree, sip tea twice, then fold it and place it in the drawer beside his chair. The drawer held many things: unused inkstones, dry brushes, a fan carved with cloud motifs that had never been opened, a single feather, still whole, still curved. The fan was a gift from a superior. He had accepted it with a smile that lasted just enough to be polite. He never used it. When asked once why he kept it, he replied, because not using something is still a kind of choice. His garden was trimmed by someone else, but he watched, not to correct, only to notice. He once observed that the gardener trimmed the southern hedge slightly shorter than the northern one. He said nothing, but he began placing his chair so that the shorter hedge framed the sunset. It became a private tradition, like many things in the house. The closing of a shutter at midday, the placement of a cup 2 finger widths from the edge, the way he touched the lintel of the doorway with his left hand when leaving the room, but not when entering. A guest once remarked that the house was peaceful. The official replied, "It is filled with habits too soft to be seen." That evening, he wrote another letter, not to anyone, just folded paper, resting on his desk, inscribed with thoughts about the angle of late light across a stone path. He did not sign it. He folded it into fourths and placed it in the box. The next morning, he stepped onto the same creaking plank. The bell sounded. The porridge was waiting, and the shadow of the tree stretched just slightly farther than the day before. And so the story settles once more into quiet. The footsteps fade into the soil. The lanterns dim. The river flows on without asking who watched it. These people we visited, softly, slowly, once woke to mornings just like ours. They washed their hands in cold water, chose words carefully, folded cloth along lines they had learned from their elders. Now their voices remain only in stone circles, in marks pressed into clay, in the rhythm of rice falling from hand to basket. It's a comfort, perhaps, to know that the quiet moments they lived, their pauses, their patterns, echoed gently in our own, not through grand histories, but in how we light a lamp, how we place our tea beside us, how we wait for sleep to come without rushing it. If tonight's story brought you peace, if it gave your thoughts a place to rest, you're kindly invited to like, share, or subscribe, only if it feels right, only if it helps you return more easily next time. And if you'd like, leave a comment to say where in the world you're listening from. We may be scattered, but still we share this hour, this quiet. Now, the night is yours. Let the story drift with you. Let the stillness deepen. Rest well, dream gently, and come back tomorrow. There will be another story waiting.